Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our Together We Thrive, Fostering Inclusion for All Students. If you need Spanish interpretation, you will see a little globe and you will need to pick either English or Spanish so that you can hear the presenter and the interpreter if you need him. Mario, is there anything else that I missed for interpretation?
No, but let me say it in Spanish for those people who are listening to us in Spanish at this point. Buenos días a aquellas personas que quieran escuchar la presentación en español el día de hoy. En la parte posterior de su pantalla va a haber un símbolo del mundo. Ahí puede seleccionar inglés o español si está utilizando un teléfono celular. También va a encontrar un icono o 3 puntos o more. Ahí también puede seleccionar español. Gracias. Finished.
Thank you so much and welcome everyone. I am going to hand it off to Marnie Norris from Inclusion Matters. She is our presenter for today and she has some wonderful information to share with you all. Marnie, will you get us started?
You bet. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here. We are honored to join LAUSD's Division of Special Education and to join all of you wonderful parents to just share some ideas and thoughts on fostering inclusion in our schools, among staff, among parents, and among students, so that we can really create social connectivity on campuses between students with disabilities and students without. So I'm going to just jump right in and get started. The chat is open, so as we go, please feel free to share ideas, thoughts. I'll be asking a couple questions, so just share your feedback so it's more of a conversation, and we'll just get started. So Inclusion Matters by Shane's Inspiration is a 25-year-old nonprofit organization. We started here in Los Angeles because two parents wanted to honor their son who was born with spinal muscular atrophy. And back in 1998, there were no inclusive playgrounds in the Western United States. So we teamed together with parents, with medical specialists, education specialists, families, to create the very first inclusive playground in the Western US called Shane's Inspiration in Griffith Park. We have 35 open throughout Los Angeles, 75 open worldwide. In addition to creating inclusive playgrounds, which hopefully some of you have been to, we also help communities implement social inclusion programming. So those playgrounds become classrooms where children with and without disabilities have the opportunity to play beyond their misconceptions about one another and discover the common ground that they share. So since 2002, very long time, we've had the honor of working with the Division of Special Education at LAUSD to promote inclusion in schools. We do this through our education program, Together We Are Able, which we'll get into in a little bit. It is geared towards elementary students, but we also, all of the principles we're talking about today apply to middle school, they apply to high school. Okay, so this is really inclusion across the grades. We have collectively worked together in over 250 schools in Los Angeles. We've reached about 50,000 students through our social inclusion programming in schools. And we've evolved our partnership with the district over the years to include training, social inclusion planning. So we're honored to be here today and to be with all of you. So why inclusion? Certainly over the past 3-4 years, since the pandemic began, as we've experienced the ups and downs of school closures, coming back to communities, we've seen a lot of changes in our students. And some of what we have seen are a reduction in social skills, right? Social emotional learning skills, So fostering inclusion right now is probably more important than ever. In addition, our schools, we've been having as a country, as a nation, an incredible conversation around diversity and equity. What we found is that conversation, there's a lot of room for improvement in that conversation to include children with disabilities, to include adults with disabilities. So this is really a wonderful time to look at our school cultures and really look at, are there gaps in inclusion? Can we broaden our approach to inclusion so that students of all abilities are part of that diversity and equity movement? And then in addition, we've seen an increase over the past 10 years of students in special education throughout the country. So a report was done in 2022 from the National Center for Education Statistics that showed that there has been a rise in special education. So more and more we have inclusive campuses, integrated campuses. So again, the time to really build that inclusion conversation on your school campus for your students is perfect. There's a lot of momentum. So I just wanted to start with what the word inclusion means to you. So if you're a parent of a child with a disability, which I am, inclusion might mean one thing to you. It might mean one thing to your child, right? Something very different. If you're an educator, the word inclusion might mean something different. So if you want to take a moment in the chat and just share with us, what does that word mean to you? What do you associate with that word? Some parents in the past have shared the word acceptance or belonging, having a child able to participate in all activities. So if anyone wants to share in the chat, we would love to hear how you define inclusion. And feel free to think about it. You can always insert it in the chat later. But think about what that word means to you personally, because I think for me, how I feel about inclusion, how I define it, is going to impact how I support it at my child's school. So in our education program, which we've been running since 2004, we've worked, as I mentioned, with over 50,000 students, and we've grown to understand that inclusion requires a few core elements. So we're just going to share those with you. And again, feel free to please answer in the chat any of your thoughts and feelings on inclusion. But it's really same space, same time, which seems like a no-brainer. All students are able to access the same activities, the same resources, but the key is adapting those activities for students with disabilities so that they can participate fully. So that might mean physical adaptations. That might mean a sensory adaptation. That might mean an social emotional adaptation so that the student feels safe to engage in those social activities at school, right? So the key is really adapting the activities with an eye to include all students. And then creating connections versus taking care of. So there are some wonderful inclusion programs out there. Sometimes some of the peer buddying programs will position the student without the disability as being a caretaker for the student with the disability. So when we're talking about social inclusion, we're really talking about creating moments of connection so that both sets of students feel that they can connect with one another and start building those social relationships that are so critical for social emotional learning. So we're always looking at, are we creating connections, right? And then how do we do that? And we'll get into that in a little bit. And then creating sensory opportunities for all students. So I don't know how many of you have children with sensory processing disorder or know children with sensory processing disorder, but every child has different sensory needs. So when we look at social engagement, we're looking at different ways to engage, right? So some students may need tactile engagement. Some students may need auditory engagement. Some students may need visual engagement. So always having multiple options for engagement so that all students have a way into the activity that keeps their sensory system regulated and calm. And then what are we doing as the adults in the room? If you've ever been a teacher, if you've ever been to any kind of camp or activity, you know that all students' eyes are on you as the adult. So what are we doing to model the behavior and the engagement that we want students without disabilities to emulate, right? So how are we showing how to support and engage so that the students without disabilities can support and engage? Right? So what we do matters, the words we use matter. So we wanted to talk a little bit today about the barriers to inclusion. What are they? It really depends on the school environment. It depends on the school culture. But what we found is the biggest barrier to inclusion for children with disabilities, for students with disabilities, is invisible, right? So in our education program, we survey students without disabilities on how they define disability, what their thoughts and feelings are towards people with disabilities. And there are some really core common misconceptions that students without disabilities have about their peers with disabilities. And these perceptions typically happen because they don't know any different, right? They may not have had an experience or have the knowledge to see fact versus fiction. So some of the common core misconceptions that we run into are a reaction to physical differences, right? A reaction to physical limitations, right? My buddy cannot engage the same way I do on a playground or in a sport because he has a disability because he uses a wheelchair. That third bullet point is the most common. The number of students with autism in our district, in our country, is phenomenally high. So chances are there are students who have different sets of behaviors that their peers without disabilities engage, but they don't understand the behavior. So they're reacting to those differences in behavior. If a student's hand flapping, they might be reacting to that. If a student's making sounds, right, instead of using words to communicate, they'll have a reaction to that because they don't understand what the sound means or what that behavior might be communicating. And then the other big piece is understanding each other, communication. If we have students who are nonverbal, right, or learning verbal communication versus students who are highly verbal, the students without disabilities quite often feel they don't understand me, right? They cannot communicate with me. And if we can't communicate, we can't connect. So we're really walking students past these misconceptions so that they can experience their peers with disabilities as peers, not as a disability, right? So some of what we're going to talk about today is how we do that. So if you're a parent of a child with a disability and you're joining us today, you know what the impact of exclusion is, right? And the impact of exclusion starting from primary, from pre-KK on through high school, has a cumulative effect, right? It can affect a child with a disability's development of social skills, their development of self-esteem, their feeling of mastery, right? Of accomplishment in social situations. And all of those can have long-term effect on the success that that person can achieve in adulthood. So when we're starting inclusion, the seeds that we're planting today can have a really positive impact as that young person grows into an adult in society. And then what are the benefits of inclusion? Inclusion benefits everybody, right? We often think about it as just being for students with disabilities. It is for everybody. The benefits that students without disabilities gain from an inclusive environment are tremendous. So for students with disabilities, it's organic social interaction with peers, right? Oftentimes, kids don't want to learn from us. They want to learn from each other. In a social situation, that's how they learn those critical social emotional learning skills, is from their peers. Adult awareness, right? Having administrators, having educators, paraprofessionals, other parents understand the value of inclusion in a school culture creates a unified understanding and importance and emphasis on inclusion for everybody. The awareness that comes for students without disabilities is tremendous. An increase in empathy, compassion, communication, right? Confidence in engaging in a new way with someone who appears to be different. So all of those social emotional skills thrive in an inclusive setting. And then overall as a school culture, right? Creating a compassionate school culture that really celebrates diversity, Monday through Friday, that celebrates it in the hallways, on school campuses, in playgrounds. So a minute ago, I talked about those social emotional learning skills, right? And how we're really rebuilding them after the pandemic. All of these skills are indicators for success later, both academically and in life, right? So there was a 2021 study. It was an international study on the benefits of social emotional learning and the impact. So that quote at the bottom, so all of these social skills, the development of them ranging from trust and creativity to assertiveness, can boost students' performance in core academic subjects. So by creating inclusion, sort of the invisible long-term benefit is skill development. So we want to talk a little bit about the how. We know we may have a school community that could really benefit from strengthening social inclusion. So how do we go about it? Where do we start, right? And we always like to say when we work with schools, the key question is, what can I do on Monday, right? What are easy, small steps that we can take? And as parents, what are small ways that we can encourage and foster inclusion that can happen on Monday? It doesn't require a brand new curriculum. It just requires rethinking how we do what we're already doing. Okay, so these 5 steps are just some of the core messages that we share. And again, our program focuses on elementary, but the messages are applicable in middle and high school, right? Explore your personal response to people who are different, to disabilities. Check your assumptions, right? Discover what's true, investigate, and then include. Find different ways to include every single day. So I'm going to share a quick video, and if you have any questions as we're moving along, please feel free to put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A function, okay? So we can answer them as we go. So I'm going to share a quick video that shows you the different steps of our education program. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to support those steps, how to support inclusion, both at the elementary and secondary levels.
Play and playgrounds are so important for children because play is the way that we learn to connect with the world. At Inclusion Matters by Shane's Inspiration, we create inclusive playgrounds and provide workshops for teachers that help them to understand the importance of social inclusion.
Fostering social inclusion for my students is so important because that gives them the opportunity to make our classroom a safe space and hopefully create a better and more inclusive world.
Let's do the sign for play. There's play. Who remembers swing? It's very similar like swing or like play. Yep, it's kind of front and back, okay? Very good.
So our education program is called Together We Are Able. The design and the intent of the program is for children to have a candid discussion around disability, experience that conversation through play, and then to sum it up at the end so that all of those perceptions and misconceptions are sort of put to rest. What does the word disability mean to you?
It means that they can't really do lots of things. They can't do the things that we could do as a person without disabilities.
Some of the misconceptions and assumptions that students talk about in that pre-conversation has to do with how they define disability. Well, if you're in a wheelchair, you can't do anything. That is common, and there's no judgment, and there can be no judgment on that with students because that is their limited experience.
Well, when I see somebody in a wheelchair, I kind of feel bad for them, like they can't really adapt and play with me, and I think that's really sad.
During the pre-visit, because students don't feel like they're being taught or talked at, they know, okay, this is something that I can learn from, and here now are some tips and tools and tricks that I can use, and then they take off running, sometimes literally.
That second step is the playground experience, and that's where we purposefully connect children together in buddy groups, and then through play, they can physically experience everything that we talked about. The introductions are super important. You come down to eye level and we make the connection. Once they've done that and all students are comfortable, then they take their buddy and everybody explores the playground and they play.
Ooh, everybody come down low. And who's this?
My buddy was Parker, and we both had this excitement when we first met each other. I introduced myself, he introduced himself, and then that moment on, I held his hand. He just didn't let go.
I think it's really important for students in my class to understand that this is someone that you can learn from. This isn't about you helping someone. That can be part of it, certainly, but it's also about what gifts do both buddies on both ends have to bring to each other.
It makes my heart feel really warm. I just feel so good.
We like playing with you, Nika. Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
And then we come back in and we do a debrief, or what we call a post-conversation. And that really is a time for students from a typically developing class to synthesize what they experience. Raise your hand if you had a good time getting to know your buddy, right? Was there anything that this time with your buddy taught you?
Don't judge a book by its cover, and everybody's different in their own way, just to make sure that everybody's being included.
I like that. We have a lot more things in common than not.
I think it's really important to get kids talking about inclusivity at a wide level. My students are going to be going into a very diverse world, and the more that they're able to be inclusive of others, the better they're going to make the world around them.
You want to go on the other slide now?
Talk to your principal. Come up with something small that you can start with. Maybe it's a conversation at your staff meeting. If you're a general education teacher, find a special ed teacher that would want to partner with you. Start the conversation.
If I could see my students come away from the 4th grade with anything, I would want them to ultimately be strong allies for others. As a teacher, nothing would make me more proud.
Okay. That is just a brief look at how we implement inclusion on the playground and in the classroom. So as I mentioned, that first conversation, we have done preschool up through 12th grade. It's a very simple conversation about perceptions, right? So it really gets the kids thinking about those invisible misconceptions that we discussed. The social interaction can happen on a school campus. It could happen at a field trip. It could happen at a school dance, at a school club, right? So again, it's really, those social experiences are transferable no matter what age the students are. And then that follow-up conversation allows the students without disabilities to really think about next steps. What can we do on Monday, right? They come up with simple ideas on how to foster inclusion for their peers with disabilities together moving forward. So it's a hello, high five in the hallway. It's a lunch club. It's looking at the school dance and figuring out ways to make it more inclusive, right? So the students come up with the ideas that then they can implement. So one of the things that's really critical is preparing the peers without disabilities, right? All of the students who may be noticing the differences but don't understand them, it's looking at ways to prepare them so they understand when Sam flaps his hands, it's communicating that Sam is feeling anxious, right? That's his way of saying, I'm uncomfortable, right? Or learning how to support somebody using a wheelchair playing sports, right? So giving them really simple tips and tools so that they can engage successfully, so that they can communicate, they can adapt their play or their social activity to support their peers with disabilities. So one of the easy and very simple ways on an elementary school campus to support inclusion is what we call integrated recess, right? So we've been working with the Division of Special Education for several years now to help schools implement inclusive integrated recess events. They can happen on a Friday, right? And it's like our field trips, but it's condensed down to 20 minutes. So we come onto the campus, we show parent volunteers and educators, paraprofessionals, how to support the engagement. And they set up Fun Fridays, where a classroom of students without disabilities partners with a classroom of students with, and they engage on Fridays through play, right, and connectivity. It's a great volunteer opportunity as well. So here's a really quick, just short video showing a Fun Friday that we did at a school in Encino. Very simple, very easy to support, and really joyful to support. We have some incredible parent volunteers who've partnered with the educators and the paraeducators on their campuses to support Fun Fridays. And it's a great way for the whole school, right, whether they're involved in the activity or not, to see the inclusion happening. So the more visible inclusion is, social inclusion is on the campus, the more everybody wants to participate. So adult support, what can we do to support inclusion? We like to think of it as being the bridge, right? If you're a parent of a child with a disability, you do this every day anyway, right? You act as a bridge between your child and that moment of engagement, right? So this is something that we work with educators and paraeducators as well on, is how do we model respectful communication, right? Are we using people first language? Are we identifying the child, not the disability, right? It's wonderful and important to acknowledge the disability or the difference. It's even more important to acknowledge the child, right? What's his favorite music? What did he do last weekend? Oh, guess what? He just had a baby brother and he is not thrilled that there is a new baby brother in the house. Has that ever happened to you? So it's using those simple moments of identification and conversation so that the peer without the disability knows Sam loves Disneyland. He does not like Splash Mountain because he hates it when water gets in his face, right? But he loves Thunder Mountain because he loves the sound, right? So just finding out, using all the tools we have so that children without disabilities or students without disabilities can identify with that person, with their peer. So respectful language, body language, being the first to reach out and give a peer with a disability a high five so that all the other students see, oh, here's how we high five each other. Here's how we say hello, right? And then normalizing the differences. The differences exist and they are important. The children without disabilities notice them, they see them, right? So it's important to acknowledge that, but then go beyond it and normalize it, right? So for Sam, when he gets nervous, he hand flaps, right? Some of us jiggle our leg. Some of us doodle in class right before an exam because we're nervous. Some of us click our pens, right? We all have ways of expressing our anxiety or feeling anxious. This is how Sam does it, right? So always looking to build that sense of common ground, right? So I love this sequence because it shows, I think, adult modeling really beautifully. We were at a field trip in Chatsworth, and we were bringing two schools together. And so the two young men in the back had never met anyone who used a walker. They'd never met anyone who was nonverbal or who used a helmet, right? So they were, as you can see in this picture, feeling a little nervous, right? How do I say hello? Where do I begin? Is this experience safe, right? So there are a lot of how do I do it feelings. I've never done this before. So Sophie, our inclusion facilitator, showed them, here's how we say hello. So the boys immediately modeled it, right? Here's how we make eye contact. Here's how we reach out. Here's how we say, hi, my name is, right? So after that, after modeling and support from the adults, the two students were able to create reciprocal connections with one another through play, which is a really organic way for children to connect, right? So just that simple adult modeling can go a long way to creating inclusion on a school campus. The more the students see it, right, the more they see us do it, the more comfortable they feel doing it. So what can we do to support inclusion, right? We always say inclusion does take a village. No one person can transform a school culture into an inclusive school culture without support. So we've partnered with PTA groups before on creating inclusion committees, right? Identifying a couple parents of students without disabilities, parents of students with disabilities, and coming together to really look at where are the points of engagement? Where are our kids socializing? And how can we adapt those so that all students have a way into that social activity, right? So if we have an integrated recess event coming up, and we know we have a lot of students coming who are nonverbal, we're going to use music as a way to build a bridge, because everybody loves music, right? It's a way for kids to connect with each other without requiring the use of language necessarily, of spoken language, right? Or looking at an upcoming school dance. If we know we have students on campus who are sound sensitive because they have autism, noises are too loud, it's hard for them to process noise, how can we modify that school dance to support it? Can we create quiet corners? Can we create quiet zones where there might be video games or there might be some kind of visual engagement play, right? How can we modify that event so that all students feel comfortable being a part of it and connecting with one another? And then really identifying who's our support team. Who are our advocates on campus? Where are our resources, right? Can we articulate our inclusive committee's vision for these events to the school administrators? Can we articulate that vision to educators, general and special education? Is there an adaptive physical education point person on campus that we can look at to create an inclusive lunchtime sporting event, right? Something simple that uses the resources we already have on our campus to create more inclusion. And then also, if you're in middle school and high school, really looking at that student leadership body. They can be a wonderful, wonderful resource for helping to promote inclusion among the students. So really looking at the clubs on your campus, looking at events like dances, and then how do we train those student leaders and then help them rethink those events, support them in creating more inclusive events on the campus. Because that leadership body can go a long way to educating the other students on campus. So what are some of those events that we can transform into becoming more inclusive events, right? I know back to school nights already happened, but thinking through some of the other events that might be coming up. Is there a fall festival at your school that you could help redesign with an eye towards inclusion? and an eye towards inclusion, knowing the students with disabilities on that campus, right? Are there holiday celebrations, culmination ceremonies? What do those look like? We worked with a school prior to the pandemic back in 2019 on their culmination ceremony because we had a student who was extremely sound sensitive, and she had a tendency to run away from the sound, to drop low, right? She was nonverbal, so it was hard for her to verbalize how she was feeling. So we worked with them on redesigning the culmination ceremony so that she could participate fully in that ceremony, right? So can she wear headphones to the ceremony to muffle the sound? Can she take breaks from the event? You know, sit maybe towards the side so she can step off with her buddy, take a 2-minute, 3-minute break, and then come back and be part of the event again, right? Is there flexibility in how we structure the events? Inclusive Schools Week coming up, first week of December every year. It's a great way to show inclusion on your campus. It's a great way to make it visible so that everybody, all the students, all the staff see the inclusion happening and to celebrate what you're already doing, right? Chances are your campus is already promoting inclusion. So let's really celebrate it. Let's share it on social media if we can, right? Projects, clubs, anything that your school is already engaged in can be made inclusive with just a little thought and a little planning. And then how do we support inclusion in the classroom? So Veronica, do you want to jump in and just share some of the thoughts on how do we encourage inclusion in the classroom?
Absolutely. Thank you, Marnie. So one of the ways you can encourage inclusion is to encourage learning activities with the same age peers that do not have disabilities. So we want to make sure that our students with disabilities are spending time with our students that are not disabled. So having those learning activities in the classroom in small group, it could be play-based, it could be academics. This is something that you can ask the teacher to maybe share some ideas and encourage the teacher to come up with ideas together based on your child's needs and likes. Also ensure that the seat does not separate the child from peers, right? So making sure that when you walk into a room, you know, our students with disabilities are not sitting by themselves, or not in a corner, or so far away that they don't seem to be part of the classroom. So making sure they're embedded in the arrangement of the classroom. And then, of course, always communicate with your general education teacher and your special education teacher so that they know your child well. There's nothing like getting to know, you know, your child, our student, and knowing what motivates them, what their likes are, what are they like at home. And if that can help us in the classroom, that will benefit everyone, not just your child, but the peers around them as well. And then speak positively about other students in the class. I think if we restory our behaviors and speak to our students and our children in such a manner where something that is seen as negative is kind of twisted into something positive, that would be wonderful. For example, if you know, your child comes home and says, "Oh my goodness, Veronica today was just so loud and was talking out of turn." You know, to turn something like that around, you could say, "Oh, it sounds like Veronica was very excited to share her ideas. I wonder if the teacher, you know, gave her a turn to share her ideas. Maybe we, you know, we'll talk to the teacher and have them ask if the student can share it either on a poster, or if she can raise her hand, or if she can have some time to speak to the class. So just changing the outlook, that's all. Because this will also allow your child to be positive in the classroom and see behaviors or other students in a positive manner. And then encourage your child to greet other students. Many times, all students actually have difficulty just saying hello, and not knowing how to interact with other children. So something as simple as make sure you say good morning, or make sure you say hello in the morning in line as you're walking into the classroom. And that can also start with the teacher. If the teacher welcomes the students in and says good morning, and many of our teachers say good morning individually to every student as they're walking in. And if that is encouraged in the classroom, like greet your neighbor that you're sitting next to and say good morning. What a great way to start your day. And it just models that good behavior of, when we see someone, we face them and we greet them, saying hello or good morning. So yeah, just encourage your child to be part of the classroom. Thank you, Marnie, for letting me speak to how we can support the inclusion in the classroom.
Of course. And I think what I love about that last example, Veronica, is how easy it is. So there's, oftentimes we think, again, we have to start something new. We have to, we don't have to build a playground. All we have to do is look at, oh, wait a minute, this is already happening Monday morning anyway. What if we harness that good morning moment and make it a hallway good morning moment, where if students with disabilities are transitioning to their classroom, we're saying good morning to everybody, right? So that everybody feels seen and connected in. There was a great program, and I cannot remember, it was pre-pandemic, and I saw it in the news, and I believe it was a middle school, not here in California, but they just had greeters. They had students who volunteered and stood there. They got there early on campus in the morning and said good morning to the students who came in, and paid compliments, said, oh my gosh, you got a haircut. That looks awesome. And just that moment. And it was done to combat some of the loneliness that the students were describing on campus. So it was just a great way to harness that transition moment that's going to happen every day anyway, and turn it into a moment of creating inclusion. And this wasn't for students with disabilities. It was done campus-wide. Right? So what are some of those just super simple moments? We had a teacher in a workshop a couple weeks ago offer up the idea of Monday morning check-ins, right? Which was a part of his classroom anyway. And having the students with and without disabilities come together every Monday morning, either in his classroom or in the special education classroom, and do their check-ins together, right? And that can happen if the student's nonverbal. Mom, dad, parent, caregivers can send them to school with a note saying, oh, we had this awesome experience this weekend. And this is what, this is what Marnie got to do over the weekend, right? So just looking at those small, simple steps we can take that really embed inclusion and make it stick, right? So a couple campuses that stand out over the years. There was one in the Valley that created inclusion that really lasted. It was an incredible effort. And just some of the steps that they took. So there was support from all adults, right? The administrator, the principal, understood the impact, the teachers understood the impact, and the parents understood the impact. And parents of both children with and without disabilities came together during the PTA meetings, and the inclusion committee would just give shout outs and updates. Here's what happened last week. Here's the experience. Ask your student about it. What did they think about it? How did they feel about it? Right? And the more the conversation started happening among the adults, the more everybody saw the benefits of inclusion, right? They did mid-year check-ins. So they started in September with a few easy activities and some training for teachers, para-educators, for other parents. And then in January did a check-in. How's it going? Where are some of the bumps in the road? What else can we do, right? So it wasn't just one conversation. It was a conversation that they kept unfolding throughout the year. They did the student awareness pieces in all the grades. So all students were thinking along the lines of inclusion. And then they did it through field trips, right? They did it through the integrated recess on their campuses. One of the things, and this is a great short story that I'm going to share, and this is one of the ways we knew this was working. It was around January, February. We were on the campus doing an integrated recess event, just checking back in halfway through the school year. How's it going? Just observing. And there was a little boy with autism who was not comfortable transitioning, right? From the physical activity of the recess to sitting in his chair. It was a very hard transition. And he was nonverbal. And he was playing with two of his buddies from the other classroom. So the 5-minute warning happened, the bell rang, recess was over, and he just dropped to the ground. He just couldn't bring himself to leave the engagement with his peers and get back to his classroom. So the adults stood around and watched for a second, and the students without disabilities dropped low to the ground with him. And they said, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to play our game all the way from the schoolyard back to your seat. And he looked up and he jumped up and they kept playing. They kept playing down the hallway. They kept playing back into his classroom until he was back in his seat. They high-fived each other and said, we'll see you at lunch, right? So just by giving the modeling and the support, the students knew immediately how to step in and engage to help create that continued socialization and help that student transition. So it was a really lovely example of when you give some of the students information and support, they take it and run with it in ways that surprise us every single day. And then a middle school that we had the total pleasure of working with in the Valley, they were so wonderful, created a group through their student leadership called Find the Kind. So there was an educator who, a general education teacher, who was inspired by inclusion and wanted to create more authentic inclusion on campus for the students with disabilities. He partnered with the special education educators and the paraprofessionals. They identified a group within the student leadership body. We did the trainings with the group. So we did that first classroom conversation about perceptions. We helped them plan some social inclusion events on campus. And it became a weekly, maybe I think 2 to 3 times a week. So it started with lunch times, right? They picked an area in the quad. They created just a lunch circle. So the students with and without disabilities came together and ate lunch together. Some of the students with disabilities were completely nonverbal. Some of them had physical disabilities. Some of them had sensory and cognitive disabilities. And they ate lunch together and engaged. That grew into music events on the campus where the students would create music together. They would drum together, right? Or they would listen to music that they loved together. But each event was visible to all the other students on campus so that it really became just a part of normal school culture to see students engaging socially. That continued with club time activities, right? During, I think, their 6th period, where they came together. Sometimes there was tutoring. Sometimes it was just social engagement. Sometimes it was a group art project that they worked on together. But we also continued with those mid-year check-ins with staff, with parent volunteers, and with the students. How's it going? What do we need? What do we envision next, right? So that mid-year check-in, that continuing the conversation is really helpful because, like I said, it takes it from just one event to a school-wide conversation that really becomes a normal conversation for the campus. We do have a family inclusive play program called My Play Club. If anyone has children with disabilities, you'd like them to participate. It's also a great way for students without disabilities to volunteer. and volunteer as buddies. It's 3 hours on a Saturday in the park of inclusive play, arts and crafts, entertainment, refreshments, and it's a great way for the whole family to celebrate inclusion. So it's on our website, inclusionmatters.org/myplayclub, if you want to check that out. And it's open for children and students of all abilities. So that is it for our time together. That's it for our presentation. Does anyone have any questions or comments or thoughts about today, or any takeaways, any inspiration? So please feel free to type them into the chat if you do have any thoughts or questions. Veronica's contact information is on this slide, as is mine. So please feel free to reach out if there's anything we can do to be of assistance for inclusion on your child's campus, your student's campus. Okay, and I'm going to end with a short video. And I love this because it to me, it really shows the power of inclusion and the power of the transformation that inclusion can have on both sets of students.
Okay, ready? Watch me. Ready? I'm going like this. My legs. Hey, look. Are you hungry? We can eat after, okay? I know you're hungry. We can eat after, okay? Let's play. Let's play, okay? Yeah, let's play. And then we can eat our yummy food, right? Yeah, let's eat our yummy food after. 1, 2. Oh, you want me to stay? I'll go up. I'll go back up. You want to go with me on my lap? Yes? Yes? No? Go here? Here. Hey. Hey, Poppy. Hey, Poppy. My legs are like this. My legs are like this. Oh, my legs are like this. I think you want to go in the rocker. Do you want to go in the rocker? Yes? No? Okay. Hi. Ready? Look at my legs. Hey, look at Hockey's legs. Look at Hockey is straight. Here, Hockey. Here, go on this one. Come on. You're doing it. Yes, you're doing it, hey. Scooch forward. Scooch forward. Go a little forward, okay? Come on. Go a little forward. Go a little forward. Come on, hey. A little forward. Hockey. Hey. And then I'm going to go with you. Hey, more Hockey. Hop. Hey. Look at your legs like this. Yeah. Doing it. Yes, that's good. Here we go. Good job. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Woo! That was fun, right? Was that fun? Hi. Ready? I'm with you. Right? Right there. Hi.
Well, thank you everybody for being with us today. Thank you for taking the time. And hopefully that gave you some inspiration, some ideas. Oh, we had a question. What is the name of that video? The video is from Edutopia, and I can go ahead and put it into the chat. It's Why Inclusion Matters on the Playground. So I will go ahead and put that into the chat. I'm also going to put some additional resources into the chat that will point you hopefully toward some inclusive ideas for your school campus.